How did that World Cup change you as a person when you see a momentous moment like Mandela and Pinar and not long out of apartheid? You're coming up through, presume private schooling and then into college. I don't know what your group of friends are like, or what who you're hanging with or associating with, but what's the opinion of the white educated man rugby player in South Africa at the time versus what we saw back in those days through the early 90s, the horror that was apartheid and the issues that the country had?
Well, Drico, it's amazing when you put it as a question like that. It probably wasn't something that I addressed personally at the time, but it's definitely something that's informed me on my career afterwards and in some of the decisions that I took at the time. Like I said, my dad and my folks were incredibly liberal. My dad came from a Scandinavian background. My mum was born in Carlingford, County Louth. So I made it in easier than Michael Liner did today with my Irish passport. But we were Southern African. My dad practiced medicine in what was Rhodesia and fought in the war against Bob Mugabe. We know how that went. We then came down to South Africa, and he was doing exactly the same thing, practicing medicine. So he just said to me, I was sort of 18 and a little bit bolshy, and post school I wanted to, start setting my stall out and start making my own decisions. And he said, I don't mind what you do, but I don't want you to go to Stellenbosch University because it's a very Afrikaans university, and how I feel about that kind of thing. So I got a scholarship to Stellenbosch University. So I went to Stellenbosch University, as you do. I'm looking forward to my 12-year-old son making the same stupid decisions. But it wasn't for me. It was a great decision because there were some incredible people there. But we went through that literally in the middle of that, So South Africa being left out of world sport and making those decisions, and the racism and the bigotry and all the stuff that had happened politically, infusing itself into sport actually affected me, completely. I mean, I wouldn't have been proud to even play for South Africa, but that was uninformed because South Africa didn't play against anyone. In apartheid, rugby wasn't a vocation. You couldn't play rugby for a living. So I went to Stellenbosch to study human movement sciences. I wanted to get into something active and outdoors and then go and explore the world. And rugby sort of crept up on me. It became a vocation. By 96, I was the first contracted professional rugby player in the whole of South Africa. I was the captain of South Africa under 19, and they signed me up 3 days before the World Cup final. And they said, we're going to hedge our bets a bit here because we might lose a couple of the senior players. Francois Pienaar and the guys are all negotiating with Murdoch, and there's a lot going on behind the scenes. And they signed up the younger players, and for me, it suddenly became a way to pay for my studies, a way for me to then carry it on. But it became a way that I could then. I wrote letters, from Leinster to London Irish to clubs over here, rugby league clubs in Australia, exploring options because suddenly the world went from no option except to maybe play a few Currie Cup games, which is our domestic competition, like the pro competition over here, to suddenly this could be a passport internationally. And I embraced that because I think rugby has become that these days. And to be honest, I'd be a little bit jealous of 18 or 19-year-old kids now because rugby isn't another form of passport. Or sport is, but they can travel around the world.
You were the poster boy of South African rugby when you burst onto the scene. So I'm just intrigued as to understand what the environment of the South African setup is like post that moment in '95 versus now what you see where there seems like this incredible togetherness within the Springboks, where there isn't a them and us environment. And rather, I don't want to labor the point, but it must have been a huge progression from that moment in '95 to where we are just a little over 20 years later.
Yeah, look, I think so. And you make, it's a very kind way to say it and not to labor the point, but it was difficult. I spoke English, first language. I came from a very English background, but I'd spoken Afrikaans second language. I'm fluent in Afrikaans, so I can read and write and converse and work in the language. But it wasn't my language of choice, and I lived in an environment where where an Afrikaans government had given us an environment that I didn't agree with. You know, my surname is Skinstad. It's a Scandinavian origin. I think I got to my second year in Stellenbosch before they realized it wasn't Afrikaans. Maybe that's why I got picked. But in fact, I remember a story. So I went in at the end of my first year. I was picked as the captain, and good example. The coach obviously didn't know that Skinstad wasn't Skinstad. It came from Skinstad, which is a small town on the coast of Norway, and literally, I don't know, 150 odd years ago, my dad's grandparents moved to South Africa, and we went into the change room, and I was the only guy in the change room who spoke English as a first language. And you have quite a traditional environment in South Africa. You know, I'm not particularly religious myself, and I've got no qualms with anyone who is, but rugby is a full contact sport, and all the Afrikaans schools growing up, they pray. You take a knee and you pray before the game. Now, whether you're religious or not, you know, let's just say you're a hedge betting man, it's not a bad option to, you know, just to say a few words before this full contact sport, and we've seen how dangerous it can be. So we get this circle of people together, and the coach looks at me, and here's your first lesson in Afrikaans. The coach looks at me and he says, "Kom ons bid." So I look at him and I go, I know this bit. Well, I obviously don't say it, but you know, mentally I'm going, okay, because I mean, I only started shaving probably last week, as Woody would tell you. At this stage, I'd met all these guys. I'm 19. Everybody looks like a Neanderthal. And I look around and I realize I know what he needs from me. He needs a bit of leadership. He needs a so I give myself a slightly more gruff voice, and I shout a little bit, and I walk across the group, and I played with guys like Kobus Versace, who played for Saracens for years, and I slapped him in the face. And I stamped my foot a little bit, and I sort of shook, you know, the stuff you guys are good at in the front row there. I try to avoid it for all the years, and I sort of made my case a little bit, and then I went back to my position. I looked at the coach, and you could see he was veritably pleased about this situation unfolding. But then he said to me again, he said the same word. He said, "Kom ons bid." And I thought, I can't believe I haven't done enough here, but I'm going to take some prisoners. And I went out, and there were a couple of outside backs. Brayton Paulser was playing in our team in the under-19. He moved out of the circle. He wouldn't let me come close to him because I was slapping and kicking. I was doing... And I went in almost for a headbutt on one of the guys. I thought, we don't want to take him down, but I was growling as low as I could. It was still a squeaky voice, actually. And I went back to my spot, and I was next to a guy called Wayne Munn. And Wayne came over and played rugby here for Connaught, played scrum off and wing for Connaught for a couple of years. And Wayne was a particularly talented player, schoolboy level, played SA under 21 with me, but he was with me at Stellenbosch. And his mum was Afrikaans, and his dad was English. So at that stage, he could speak more Afrikaans than me. And he whispered under his breath the real meaning of Kom ons bid, which was, "Let us pray." And I stopped sweating, and I said the first prayer which came to mind. I said, "For what we're about to receive, may the Lord make us truly thankful." And it won't surprise you that I've never been asked back to Stellenbosch University to do any form of motivational speaking